Hello, I'm Nan Geschke, your host of the Los Altos History Show. Tonight, as we have as our guest, Paul Nyberg. Welcome, Paul. Thanks for being on the show tonight.
Glad to be here.
Paul is the publisher of the Los Altos Town Crier and has been our guest on the History Show a couple of other times, once to discuss Portrait of a Community, the book that was published to commemorate the 40th anniversary of the Los Altos, the town of Los Altos, the incorporation, and then wants to share with us the 50th anniversary of the town crier, and he brought lots of photographs and anecdotes and funny stories. So Paul has been a great guest. But tonight he's come to share a new project, the publishing of this book called Paint the Town, Images and Art, compiled by his wife Liz Nyberg and himself. And Paul, this is, first of all, congratulations. This is a wonderful book. But please tell us a little bit about how you had the idea for this book and how you actually compiled it. It's just kind of an interesting story, isn't it?
Well, it came about from a brainstorm, I guess you'd say. I was driving into the village one day to our office on Main Street in mid-1999, and I sort of thought, this is the last year of the 20th century. Wouldn't it be fun to capture what Los Altos looks like this last year of the 20th century? And I thought about doing a photo essay or maybe a video or whatever, and then it dawned on me, maybe we could ask all the artists that live in the area to come and paint their version of various buildings and scenes around town, and we could capture those in a book, and it would become something that might be a real treasure for the community.
So how did you lasso all these artists?
Well, I sent out the call to come and paint the town, literally, and we had some silly comments like, what color are we going to paint it, beige or blue or whatever, but what we really meant was we set a date in June in 1999, invited the artists to come, to bring their easels and their paints and their brushes and to set up throughout the village, throughout the whole town, to paint. Then they chose their own subjects. Some of them picked a bank, some of them picked a scene on Main Street, as you'll see. Some of them picked churches. But they painted away for a whole day, and at the end of the day they said, this was so much fun, we'd like to do it again. 45 artists showed up and painted that first day.
That's unbelievable.
And then we did it again in September, and we ended up with about 90 images of their art, some in watercolor, some in oil, some on pen and ink. And so we have all these different styles and all these different kinds of images. And seeing a village or seeing a building through the eyes of an artist is quite different from seeing it through the lens of a camera or even standing looking at it yourself. And so that's what this book represents. The way it worked is the artists got to keep their original art and they could sell it. Many of them have sold their art to the building owner or to business owners or friends. But we had permission, we requested permission to publish it in a book. And the book was intended to be a nonprofit fundraiser for the community organizations, and we'll maybe talk a little more about that later.
Well,
but
let's talk about it now, because we may not have time later,
okay.
So that's a good.
What we did once we started accumulating all this art, and we saw we really did have the possibility of doing a book. We then figured out what it would cost to print. The printing and paper and binding of a hardcover book is not cheap. And it was to print 3,000 copies would cost about $25,000. So I kind of let the word out to some friends and people like the Packard Foundation, and little by little we gathered up $25,000 to pay the printing bill. And once we got the books, which just arrived in the last 2 weeks, they now have been distributed to about 10 different nonprofit organizations in town who are
Some of them are
selling them. They're selling them, and they get to keep the $25 the selling price. And that's Sister Cities is selling them. History House has them. The Art Docents Hidden Villa is selling them. The Kiwanis Club, the Sunset Rotary Club, the PTA is selling copies in the schools and keeping the money to use in the PTA project. So we have many organizations that are benefiting from this, and they get to keep all the money.
So this idea of yours was to sort of capture the town in the year 2000.
Well, yes, end of 1999,
early part of the 21st century.
We haven't figured out yet which is the last year of the 20th century, this year or last year, but we started out assuming 1999 was.
Debate.
And so it really were, most of the paintings were all done, were done last year in 1999.
Well, let's get started, and let's start with the cover. The covers, I should say, the front and the back covers. Remember, this is the Paint the Town images in art. And this one is very attractive, Paul.
Well, it's beautiful. It's a watercolor by Jean Morin, and it's taken of her. She stood at the end of Main Street across from the Community Plaza, looking up Main where it curves away toward the hills. And on the right side in this picture is the Town Crier office building, and across from that is the Italian Deli and the Cookie Cafe, which are all familiar landmarks to anyone around Los Altos. One of the things that's interesting in paintings and in photos, as we look back years ahead and we look back, is that is to see the cars. And cars date any picture that they're in.
Absolutely.
And these cars will date this painting into the future.
So 50 years from now, we'll be able to date this not by anything but those cars.
By looking at the cars.
And the back cover, too, is interesting. This is the Olympic Wannabe sculpture that's in Connor Park.
This is new to Los Altos. It's a new landmark. It was just installed last May in 2000, and we were getting ready to go to press with the book, and it dawned on me that it would be great to have a painting of that also, because it's here in the community and will be here for the next 100 years, we assume. And Kathy Sharp, a very good artist, professional artist here, I asked her if she could hurry up and paint that so we could include it in the book. And one of the interesting tasks she had, she resisted a little bit, because she said, I really have a hard time painting somebody else's art. This is copying somebody else's art, the sculpture.
Oh, interesting.
And the Olympic Wannabes was created by a famed sculptress, Glenna Goodacre, in New Mexico, Santa Fe. And she's a woman who created the new dollar that the Treasury Department released with the little girl on it, the Sacagawea.
Yeah.
That was designed by Glenna Goodacre, and we have this wonderful piece of her art here in our town permanently.
It's my favorite sculpture in Los Altos. Well, let's get started, Paul. We've chosen quite a few images to share with our viewers tonight, and this very first one is of the DeMartini Market.
Yeah, the orchard. In the 1920s, this roadside fruit stand first was in business, and it's been there continuously since. Mr. DeMartini sadly was killed by a car out in front of his roadside stand back in the 20s or early 30s, but his family continued to maintain the fruit and vegetable stand, and it's still there today. I might just say that the book is in two sections. First of all, we have the section that we're starting now, which is the village, all of the images on Main Street and State Street and on side streets, First Street, Second Street, and so on. And then the last part of the book, about the last third, is we call it our community. And it's all of the buildings and churches and City Hall and the other outside the village landmarks in our community, and we'll see that in a minute.
Right, and I see that you have a quote here from Oliver Goldsmith, the loveliest village of the plain. I like that.
Yes, that's what we think we are.
We're now in the village, and the second image that we're coming upon is the familiar landmark now, but it's fairly recent, isn't it, Paul?
Yeah, the Community Plaza, which is next to Citibank on Main Street, was built in 1993 with funds that were raised by the local Rotary Club. They sold bricks to families and so on. And you can see those bricks on the floor of the plaza. The clock in the plaza has also become a landmark in the community. It was installed at the same time. It was a gift to the community from Louise Spangler in memory of her husband, Denny Spangler, who had been on city council.
Yes, and had been mayor, I believe.
Yes, he'd been mayor.
Right. And moving right along, the next image is an interesting one. And when I first looked at it, I was a little puzzled, and I think you were too, Paul.
Yes. Well, it's a look down Main Street from actually right in front of the town. Would be standing in front of the town crier office, and there are no cars in the picture. You look at it and say, well, you know, what's the story on this? But the artist had gone and taken a picture and then later captured it in this painting on Christmas Day, and so the name of the painting is Christmas Day on Main Street.
Oh, it's wonderful.
And most of us probably don't see Main Street when it doesn't have cars on it.
And this building is a familiar one to you.
Yes, that's the home of the town crier. It was remodeled in 1995. The idea of the building was to capture sort of a town crier image. The town crier term comes from England, actually, and New England, and there still are some town criers in business that ring a bell, hear ye, and beller out the news for the day, and that's what the town crier is all about.
And there's even a quote here from Hamlet that includes the town crier.
Yes, Hamlet, Shakespeare, I didn't know this until a year or so ago. I stumbled onto this line from Hamlet. He has Hamlet saying at one point, I'd has lief the town crier spoke my lines. And every time we hear Hamlet, of course, we wait for that, that one line.
That's your line. So let's see, the next one is, another familiar gathering place in town, the Los Altos Bar and Grill, which is under new management.
Yes, and it's being remodeled. It's just, I believe, it's just reopening, in fact, as we speak. And it's been a landmark for a long time, a gathering place. And this painting is one of my favorites also in the book. While the artist was painting this in June, in the afternoon, I was walking around looking and talking to some of the artists, as were a lot of people. These artists had a lot of fun because people were hanging around watching them paint that day. And while I was there, suddenly the artist looked up and said, look, and we looked on top of the canopy, and there is a pigeon sitting up there. So she quickly captured the pigeon, to get it in the painting.
The pigeon is now immortalized.
Right.
Now, this image of Kahn's Pharmacy is near and dear to everybody's heart, I think, in Los Altos. And I know that it has a particular, it rings true with us because we were able to interview Mel Kahn and talk about his father, Sammy. But it's also interesting because...
Well, architecturally, it's quite interesting because it was built, it was one of the very first commercial buildings designed by Goody Steinberg, Los Altos architect who's built lots of homes and many buildings around. He built designed the Chamber of Commerce building for Los Altos, which is down at the end of Main Street on Foothill. He designed the city police station, and those were his designs. And this building he designed for the Kahns,
who have decided to actually close the pharmacy.
And this is one of many in the book already, which we will be seeing as we go along. In the space of about a year, from the time this book, the artists completed their paintings, until just before we went to press, there were over 11 storefronts that already changed their face.
I know, that's just amazing to me.
So that was one of the ideas of this book. We better capture the look of this while we have it, or we'll forget who was there.
We'll forget who's there, yeah, I guess we're going to have to. Oh, here it is. This is it. This is what's now called the cover story, and it's a two-story building painted by Jan Meyer, who is a friend of ours. And actually, Jan painted the backdrop here for the Los Altos History Show, so she even has a role on our show as our set designer. Now, this building has been has housed many businesses, and it's an old building. I believe it was the house. It housed the fire department at one time. It also was a private residence. You can see from the upper story that there were living quarters up above, and there were before the cover story there was a card shop that was housed here. Now, this building is another great gathering place in town, isn't it, Paul?
Well, one of the things the artists did was, that pleased me a lot, is they captured the whole feel of Main Street or State Street or the Village. Not only are these cold pictures of buildings or paintings of architectural renderings of buildings, but they did such a good job of capturing people. And if you look at the people sitting here and outside Starbucks reading the paper, or with a dog, or with a bicycle leaning against the flower pot, it is just so realistic, and just brings us right into
I love the mood
the scene
of that painting, and I love the mood of this painting. This is the by Marge Arnold. It's Main Street looking south from 2nd Street, and the reason I like it so much is the fact that it has a great mood with the purples and greens, but it actually shows the foothills in the background, and it kind of gives me the sense of this set design, because it gives you the real sense of the village being nestled into the foothills, and that's sometimes we lose sight of that. You know, we get so busy that we forget about the beautiful hillsides. And now this building, the Bayview Bank, was the second building in town, built again by Paul Schaup, who is known as the father of our town. And it's a 2-story building on the corner of Main and 2nd. It at one point was a grocery store. It was known as McDuffie's, and then later Robinson's. On the 2nd story, it housed a school at one point. This was the first site for the Los Altos Elementary School. It housed the Boy Scout troop, and they used it for church services, and then eventually for office space. Now, Bayview is in there now, but there was also another bank in there before that. And then it also has been a dress shop and sort of many other shops too.
But it is really a landmark, and anybody who's walking on Main Street, you know, should stop and take a look at it. There is a plaque on the front wall explaining its history, and is well worth looking at. Then, as we go across the page to the next painting, Mac's Tea Room, or as it ended its life, Mac's American Grill, it also has been a landmark that was. And once again, we feel happy that we captured it before it went out of business. It is empty as we speak. We don't quite know what will be there in the future.
No, we were just talking before. I couldn't figure out how long Mac's has been in business, but it has to be at
several decades.
Several decades,
yes.
Exactly. So let me see if we can put the book down and pull this apart. And here we have another landmark, which is Al's
Barbershop.
Al's Barbershop.
Yeah, another landmark on Main Street that is no longer there. Al's Barbershop was opened, that shop or that building was opened as a barbershop in 1923. It probably had the longest run as a single business of any building on Main Street or in the downtown. Al took over the business in 1948, and he's still barbering in town, Al Geldridge. But this landmark was taken down, and the building remodeled in 1999.
Great. Oh, we did a show with Al, and in fact, we taped the last day he was open, and it was marvelous. We had 4 generations of families who had their hair cut by Al or his partner.
Well, Al, like his building, his shop is sort of a landmark in our community. He happens to be my next door neighbor. He not only cuts my hair, but he trims my trees.
He's a good cutter.
he's a good neighbor.
And now this building, the Copeland building, is another landmark building in downtown Los Altos at the corner of Main and 1st Street. It's a 2-story building, and it has a wonderful facade, doesn't it, Paul?
It does. That's one of the things that amazed me. These buildings that were built back in the teens and the 20s, not only in Los Altos, but elsewhere in our valley, they didn't spare any expense in the way they built these. They built them very durably, and they withstood the test of time, and here they are, and they have some character. They have that architectural character that so much of our new buildings today are hurry up and build them and then tear them down in 10 years.
Exactly, and that housed the first post office in Los Altos. And then going on to the next, we have another.
Yeah, we've moved over to State Street now. We've divided the book into kind of a walking tour of Main Street and State Street. Now we're on State Street, and one of the landmarks that also, like some of the others we've talked about, is going out of business, and that's Heinzelman's Bookstore. This painting was captured by Jim McGinnis, a well-known artist here in town who does the cat posters for the Summer Art Festival. And this is a pen and ink drawing with color. And he's an excellent artist.
Yeah, that's
but
wonderful.
Again, it's a great loss to the community to have that store close.
And then we have Viewpoints, which is also on State Street, a good local gallery to pick up art from local artists.
Several artists that have their work there participated in the book, so you can even find some of the paintings there.
Exactly, and this is a new building.
Yeah, we included that in our collection. Well, partly because it was painted. That's the main reason, I suppose we would say. But it's a rather new building, and it's contemporary, and yet it has a feel for the village that we think will survive and be acceptable as part of a village ambience, 20 years, 40 years, 100 years from now.
Sure, exactly. Now, this is the train station in Los Altos. Again, probably the most important historical building in town, the train depot. It's now an antique store, but it was built around 1911, and it's considered important enough to be eligible for the National Register of Historic Places. It is a local landmark, landmarked by the city of Los Altos, but it actually is very, very well preserved and is a wonderful example of early railroad architecture.
And again, we thank Paul Schaup for that, for bringing the Southern Pacific through this area. That's why our town is here, and that station is a symbol of that.
And let's see, have we missed one here?
Well,
No, this is another store on First Street, which is a hardware store, but it has had a long history as Clint's Ice Cream.
Right.
And that little top piece there used to be an ice cream cone, and I think we have a photograph of that we're going to insert here so that you can see how it looked like when it was painted as an ice cream cone. And our friend Jan Meyer actually painted that out for the hardware store. So let's see where we are now. Now we're going on into the community, out of the village now and into the community. And this is an important new resource for the town, isn't it, Paul?
Yeah, this sculpture was created by a Los Alton, R.J. Truman, and it was dedicated on July 4, 1998. Over 3,000 people came to this dedication in Schaup Park, and it's a beautiful piece. It salutes all of the veterans and service people in all branches of service that have served their country. And what's incredible about the image to me is that it demonstrates that our military doesn't exist to kill people, it exists, or to take people's lives, it exists to save people's lives. And this man holding this small child and caring for it, nurturing that, demonstrates that whole idea of what we know we stand for, which is peace.
It's really, really well done. Now this painting of History House is an important one, I think, for people to recognize that this home, built in 1905 by Gilbert Smith, is a wonderful example of rural craftsman farmhouse architecture. It was a part of an 10-acre orchard which was sold to the city of Los Altos for its civic center. And when both the Smiths died, the house was deeded to the city, and it became the History House Museum. And it's now the House Museum. There is another building now being built on the Civic Center property, but it's an important example, and it's very well preserved. And these are some other views, one of the water tower behind History House, and also of the orchard in springtime, which is a glorious sight. And the 1 acre of the Civic Center property is actually deeded to the growing of apricot trees.
Yeah, every time we see this painting or see these trees, we're reminded of the Joyce Kilmer's famous poem that poems are made by fools like me, but only God can make a tree, and they're really special to see,
Right.
to have these orchards.
Now this is a fun one. I mean, I really love this painting, Paul. What can you tell us about this?
Well, this, when I first saw it, when the artist brought it in, I didn't see him paint this. He just brought it in after he had finished it, and Will Mahler. And it is the Los Altos Nursery. But it looked to me at first blush like it was painted in Venice or someplace in Italy or some far-off place, but it's right here in Los Altos, the Los Altos Nursery, which also has a great history. It's been owned for 3 generations by the Ferrucci family, and I think you've done a
we have
you've done
a show. I know.
on the Ferruccis.
And actually, it's interesting. We have a few more shots that we'd love to show you, but I think this is a good teaser for you to see, for you to buy this book from your favorite nonprofit organization. And it's been kind of nostalgic for me, Paul, to kind of walk through this book because we've done so many shows over the last 8 years, you know, about the history of some of these buildings and the families that have been associated with them. So our time is up for this part of the show, but I wanted to let you know that tonight is the last Los Altos History Show to be produced at Foothill College. And I wanted to take this opportunity to thank a whole lot of people who've made this, who've been my support system for the show over the years. And I just want to mention them all because they've been so important to me. First of all, Suzanne Elwell and Dave Souter of Access Los Altos, they're really the dynamic duo up here. You can't do anything without them. And many of the crew of the History Show have been with us for the past 8 years. And I want to especially thank all of them, especially Bob Stroud, our lighting specialist and cameraman par excellence, for his wonderful skills, but also his delightful sense of humor and his diligence at I think, being at every single history show except for a couple of them that I can remember. To Linda Vinker, our teleprompter person and operator and associate producer. She makes my job look easy. To Bob Ingold, who designed the Access logo and who's directed the show and has been a cameraman for many years. Thank you, Bob. Chris Johnson has been invaluable as our on-location cameraman and post-production editor. Chris works the audio on the interview part of the show, but believe me, I couldn't do this show without Chris. Thank you a million, Chris. I want also to thank Joy Swanson and Lori Kurgis, who both helped with the technical direction. To Dave and Beverly McChesney, who have worked camera and the character generation. Beverly also has produced some of the history shows here at Access Los Altos. I also want to thank my friend Judy Johnson, who has worked as floor director, CG operator, and technical director. And I also would like to thank Janet Freeland, who's been our floor director. And finally, I want to thank our director, Glenn Quinn. He is our director extraordinaire. He has helped us out for the last 3 years directing the history show. So many, many thanks to you, Glenn. Thanks also go to Craig Gower and for his past support, and to my husband Chuck, who often helps with the post-production editing. He's even hosted this show once. So if I've forgotten any of you, I humbly beg your forgiveness. But I also want to thank you, the most important people, the viewers, who faithfully watched and commented on the Los Altos History Show. Many, many thanks. So thanks for your time, and I hope to see you soon. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you.